We have our Beyond Assumptions, Evidence, Equity, and Credentials in Action. So we're going to talk about how we're measuring our student learning outcomes. We're using Canvas rubrics shared across campus, and then tying those to digital credentials. And so to get us started, just wanted to introduce our team. We just go across the screen. So I'm Louisa Villeneuve. I'm biology faculty and also one of the Outcomes and Assessment Committee facilitators and SLO coordinator for our campus. And then I'll just pop it on to Lisa.
Oh boy. Oh, I lost my Zoom window. Skip me.
Oh, skip you and come back. Okay, Bradley, you can give a little
Oh, you can hear
self-introduction.
me?
We can hear you.
Oh, well, in that case, I'm Lisa Pitts. I teach geography. I'm also, sorry, my Zoom window disappeared. SLO coordinator.
And Bradley?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bradley Franklin. I am an administrator for Instructional Systems and Pathways Innovation with the Department of Institutional Effectiveness here at Chaffey College.
I can never get your title, so I'm glad you did it. And we can have Ariel introduce herself.
Rolls off the tongue now, Louisa.
Oh, there you go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Salas Martinez. I'm a research and data solutions analyst at Chaffey College, housed in institutional research.
That's our team for today. And then just a little breakdown on what we're covering. We'll start off with how we assess student learning outcomes through Canvas, then get into how we engage faculty in that assessment process, how we analyze the data, get into some of those analysis details, and then how we tie student learning to the digital credential system. And so I will hand it over to Lisa to kind of get us started on that background.
So, I'm here to talk about how we got here. So when we looked at our mission statement closely, it wasn't just aspirational, it was operational. We focus from the lens of equity and innovation, which require more than, I'm sure, as you know, good intentions. It requires evidence. And so out of that grew something that we call our ACES, our Academic Career Employability Skills. And basically, they help us ask a simple question. How do we actually show that students are developing the skills we say that we value? And this led us to determine and see, how do we make that learning visible? How do we account and assess for that? Ooh, oops, we're missing. Okay, there we go. Sorry. I'm like, wait, where are the rest of the slides? All right, so if we go to the next slide, we see that we realized that we really had a gap between what we believed was going on and the evidence we had to demonstrate that. So like most colleges, we believe that students are learning, but we couldn't really consistently show it in a way that was visible and equity focused and comparable. And so we went from what we call assumed learning. You collect SLO data, but it lived in spreadsheets that nobody really looked at, especially the students, and didn't really drive improvement, or really kind of enter into our equity conversation. So what we realized is we needed some sort of common language. And for us, again, that common language started with our institutional learning outcomes, which bore out these things called ACEs. So we align them to national best practices and employer competencies and regional workforce needs. And that gave us a shared language that we could talk to across all the disciplines. Next, we took those and we aligned our Canvas rubrics to those outcomes. So faculty really led this work. It was supported essentially through the Outcomes and Assessment Committee. And rubrics really became the vehicle for our assessment. It wasn't really an add-on. So if the students were already demonstrating it, we just needed to capture it in a way that was equitable and was evident. And so the key principle was that there had to be some amount of trust. So what we did is we eliminated manual reporting. We embedded ACEs directly into what the faculty was already doing. And with a few clicks of a rubric, you get some really great ways to demonstrate student success. And so now students can see their growth. They can get these things that we call micro-credentials. They can leave with evidence and not just units. So learning really becomes visible, portable, and meaningful. And because these are automatically disaggregated, we can see which students are demonstrating skills, where there are gaps, and where we can target any changes that need to be made. And so instead of really kind of guessing, we can act and see those patterns. And so today we've assessed like 430,000 outcomes and awarded more than 85,000 credentials. And the two like top ones are critical thinking and communication. I like to think that's because that everybody is teaching critical thinking and communication. And we should really focus as an institution and as educators on that. Everywhere I go, that's all they keep saying. Students need to think critically and know how to communicate their ideas. So, it kind of like, and that led us to where we're at now, which we'll talk a little bit more later, which is kind of like equity at scale in the sense that, yeah, we've assessed all these, but our next steps, and I know someone's going to talk about it coming up, so I don't want to step on their little toes. So if we go to the next slide, each of these 4 institutional learning outcomes had 3 nested skills, and so we really have 12 transferable competency, things like adaptability and communication, empathy, digital fluency, social justice, environmental responsibility, lots of stuff in there that we realized we could identify across the campus. And then we did this using our what we call 3-prong approach. So back to you, Louisa.
So if we keep in mind that our ACEs skills, they are derived from our institutional learning outcomes. So going across campus that doesn't really matter what discipline you're in, but all of us are at least tying into these skills in some place or another, either critical thinking or communication. And so we kind of tying this, kind of getting faculty involved. We can think it starts in the classroom, right? That going back, like Lisa mentioned, I feel like pre-COVID, SLO assessment was usually someone coming around, at least the different campuses I worked with at the time, someone came around and said, here, will you give this assignment out to your class? I would go give it to my students and then collect all the papers and give it back to the person who was responsible for SLO assessment. I never really got to see what we did with it. I don't think students ever saw what we did with it. So we switched gears and looked into that common language, like Lisa was saying, about ACEs skills, things like communication, critical thinking, that are cross-curricular, and that we all assess that in our class. And so whenever I have an assignment I'm doing in my class, so I teach biology, if I'm doing an assignment that involves critical thinking, when I go to grade that in Canvas, I can still grade my assignment like I'm usually doing, but now that ACEs skill for critical thinking is also aligned with my Canvas rubric. And I can just pull that critical thinking skill and add that to my rubric I'm already using. So I'm taking a real assignment and I'm just adding the critical thinking, this one criterion, to that rubric. So when I go to grade it, it's just a matter of clicking the button in Canvas and submitting it. And then my part is done for a little while. We have our distance education and institutional research areas that help us kind of gather that data. They can see what's going on in Canvas and collect all the data from all the different courses who are assessing these ACEs skills. And then it comes back to me when I have to do program review, checking to see for our program, individual programs, are our students learning what we say that we're teaching them? And so we get the data from institutional research. They help us analyze it so we can look at the ACEs data and see, are our students really successful at learning critical thinking skills? And then when we disaggregate it, I can look and see what strengths are there and are there any gaps? We can look at the equity patterns, thinking of gender, first-year college students, ethnicity, thinking of the different minority populations. Are we missing anybody? And then kind of to close the gap, as a discussion in our program, individual programs, start thinking and troubleshooting about ways that we can help close those gaps. What can we do differently? Can we revise our assignments? How are we going to adjust our instruction? And really help support the students that might be falling through those gaps. And then once we come up with a strategy, take that back and put it back into our assignments. And so it's kind of an ongoing process. Rather than doing a one and done SLO assessment, we're constantly doing SLO assessments and then analyzing the data, discussing it, and then revising in our classroom. And so when we think of each of our programs are kind of where we are lumped still into, I guess, overall divisions. We wanted to get faculty to focus, at least with 12 ACES skills, that would be very hard to really apply all those ACES skills to all of our classes. So we've got departments to pick and using what skills are needed in industry, kind of targeting which skills are most essential for those areas. So for things like health and wellness, it overlaps with analysis. It's kind of, we have a little color coding, the orange kind of for analysis, the red for empathy, and that kind of greenish for communication. So those are kind of like the targeted areas that mapping skills in industry to what our students were learning in our classroom. We could do the same in STEM for science, technology, engineering, and math. Again, analysis, communication, entrepreneurial, kind of innovative skills. So we asked faculty to select, starting with just 2 to 3 ACES skills that really applies, because they're very broad, pick a skill that really applies to what they're teaching in their classroom and apply it to the assignments they're currently doing. So instead of doing additional work, we're just assessing what the students are already doing in the classroom. And then when we look at this data with the help of our distance education and institutional research, we get our data dashboards. This is done kind of on the back end. And just to kind of give you a little sneak peek, we've done almost 500,000 assessments so far. And when we look at these data dashboards, this one's just showing us for the last academic year. We can see that we can break down or disaggregate the data and look at gender, we can look at ethnicity, we can look at age ranges, and we can track our student success rates. We can pick our specific programs or even our specific departments and see how our students are doing with these skills that we're assessing. We think they're learning those skills, but this is showing us and giving us the evidence as to how many are actually learning it and where we might be needing to step in and change what we're doing to fill in those gaps. And through this process, as students are getting assessed on these ACES skills, they're also earning credentials, which we'll get into in a little while. So they've earned up to 85,000 ACES credentials so far, which gives them a little badge showing they've earned critical thinking skills. And we can see the percentage of skills that are being assessed across the campus, with the top 2 being communication and critical thinking. This is kind of like a little sneak peek of how we analyze our data. And then I will pop it over to Ariel to talk about that data end.
Thank you, Louisa. Okay, so first for my section, we are going to dive into the dashboards, but I've been asked to review a little bit more about the technical side of it, where the data lives, how it's stored, and all that good stuff. So we could start from where does it live? So our team that developed this ACES framework has housed it under Canvas. So in Canvas, if you have access, you have your courses in your left side panel. There is an admin settings and then a settings under admin and then reports. And that's sort of where I extract it from. How it exports is an Excel file. So it's not connected to any of our live databases yet. I'm working with our admin systems in IT to do a live informer colleague connection to it. But right now it is stored in Canvas. And so I'm a researcher, right? So I know that we have access to a lot of the Canvas data. This is only specific to ACES assessments. So although we do have access to pull any, exams, assignments, and quizzes, the data that I'm focusing on today is specifically aligned with ACES rubrics. So when I extract the data from Canvas, it is only isolated to ACES assessments. What does that really mean, right? So as Louisa and Lisa were sharing, that when faculty align their assignment with ACES, the rubrics in Canvas, it is automatically identified as an ACES related assessment, and it's stored in a separate master file. So, along the way, we've had different leadership, and they've identified that as an outcomes results file. But basically, for the researchers in the room, we have, on this Excel spreadsheet, different variables which are in the columns. So I think something really, really like critical to discuss is how we're even sourcing the information to be able to disaggregate it, right? So I just listed some of the variables. That's not even all of them, but it's really important and critical to attain the student name, the student ID. Then we have some assignment characteristics like their assessment titles, submission dates, the learning outcome names. So if it's critical thinking or digital fluency or data utilization, we also need to know the scores, how our students are scoring. Our rubric for ACES is on a 1 through 4. So we need to know the score assessed with that. And there's also this nomenclature crosswalk that helps me identify them. So there's learning outcome IDs. So I really get a lot of data from that, right? Just to give you an idea. We can proceed to the next slide just to show you, because a lot of folks think that, I don't know, either I create it or I source it, but this is what it looks like, right? So if you're familiar with Canvas, this is my main Canvas page, and on that left side panel, I'm able to access my admin account, go down to that settings, and then under reports, this is where it lives. We can advance. Okay, now we're going to transition a little bit into the visualization of it all, the dashboard. So although I get this really massive Excel file that I extract from Canvas, and it takes quite a bit to download if you're doing it comprehensively, right? Because we started assessing these probably, I think in spring 2019 was our early assessments. So there's a lot of data cleanup that has to go into it before I'm able to visualize it and help our campus make sense of the data. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the technical piece behind this as well. So data wrangling, I kind of like that word because it just kind of, it's kind of gimmicky, right? But really what that means is that I'm data cleaning, I'm reshaping, I'm transforming, I'm turning this messy-ish data into something consistent, clean, and structured. And it's really essential that I have those IDs because I'm able to identify our ACES outcomes. We've transformed a few of them. We have like 10 solid ones, but over the last 3 years or so, 2 or 3 additions or modifications have emerged. And so I'm able to track those through this cleaning process. And I do all of that through Stata. Stata is a statistics software similar to SPSS and R if you're familiar. So I'm importing that Excel file straight into Stata, and I'm identifying terms, academic years. I'm grouping course names, course sections, because remember, this is every assessment, ACES assessment in every course, right? So some of our faculty are champions, and they're assessing many ACES through various assignments in one course. And then some are kind of like our students in that they dabble with ACES every other term or so, but I'm able to identify who's doing what and how our students are doing on that 1 to 4. After I clean it up a little bit with my crosswalks and identifying ACES, I'm able to then merge it into our MIS data file that contains student IDs. This part is really critical because our original file that I discussed that's housed in Canvas does not include demographic characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, age, and it definitely doesn't tell us any of the special populations that they may or may not be participating in, such as our Emoja, EOPS, or Veterans Center, right? And so once I'm able to clean that file and merge it in MIS, when I identify the student IDs, now this is different, right? This isn't an assessment file. This file is to identify my unduplicated student head count, like who are engaging in these activities, so that I can actually analyze it. Through that, I'm also analyzing course and course characteristics, right? Like modalities, how long the session length is, where the course is located, what academic department it's under, etc. Once I'm able to do that, that's when I upload it into Tableau. Let's see. I'm going to keep going and then I'll answer questions at the end, but keep putting in your questions so I can answer. I see. So for data visualization, before I put that into Tableau, because I don't do really any manipulation in Tableau itself, I'm creating the dashboard. There is one critical step of anonymizing the data, right? So I told you how critical student IDs were to be able to match those demographic characteristics. I then completely anonymize the data. I give them new IDs that are completely different. It's just sequential, and then I drop their old IDs. So I'm removing any identifying information, both for the student and the faculty, because on our public dashboards, it's not at the section level. So I had to analyze it and then anonymize the data. And suppress even small sample sizes to make sure that I can visualize it in Tableau. And then in Tableau, if you're familiar, I upload that file, I connect my data source, and then I'm building these worksheets. And so on our dashboard, you'll see we have different bar charts, mostly bar charts actually, stacked bar charts, horizontal ones. But each of those visualizations is its own worksheet in Tableau. And then once you build the dashboard in Tableau, I basically drag and drop these containers with these worksheets so that I can filter on all of our characteristics. So if we want to go to the next slide, this is what our dashboard looks like. And he kind of got to squint and lean in a little bit. Don't worry about it because we're actually going to go through it. So Louisa, if you could click on that dashboard link. I want to briefly talk about the dashboard, right? Because I've talked about where it's housed, how it's sourced, how it's analyzed, and then it's visualized, but this is only as good as people use it, right? And so at our campus, we sort of try to model our dashboards very similar to have all of the filtering options. So this first bar chart are those assessments that we talked about, right? That you saw that 475,000 assessments. That's where Lisa was able to pull that from. This is just telling you as the years go by, and what you see is a gradual increase of the amount of faculty implementing ACES assessments in their courses. If you scroll down a little bit, Chaffey has something called academic and career communities. And so those are like larger umbrellas for every academic discipline and department. So that's how you're able to visualize those there. We kind of grouped our academic departments there, but we see which departments are assessing and maybe not so much. But then you really have to keep in mind, especially when I'm data coaching, like, okay, we clearly see that arts, communication, and design have 144,000 or so. Kind of makes sense because that includes our English courses. And English courses, there are many of them. There are many sections. There are a primary GE. And so there are many opportunities to assess ACEs there. So it's not really about competing with these visualizations. It's about just absorbing the information of how our college is assessing ACEs as a whole. So if we move down, we're able to see the percentages of ACEs skills. So what does this mean? This is telling us which skills we are assessing at the college level. And so Lisa mentioned earlier that, clearly communication, critical thinking, and digital fluency are our top 3 ACEs skills, which is really good to know at a college level, because then we can see what are we not assessing, right? So the whole point of these ACEs skills, it's not just about grades and units and completion. It's really about empowering the students to know what they're developing along the way to be able to communicate to employers. And on the college level, we get to see, oh my goodness, well, it looks like empathy is under assessed, but also data utilization. And so in my conversations with faculty, we get into conversations because if it's not a stats course, or if it's not a direct correlation like a math course, they say, oh, I don't need to do data utilization. And maybe they don't, but it's engaging with our faculty to help them understand which ACEs they can and can't, or not can and can't, what's a better word? Which ACEs better align or don't align with their areas, right? And so I think from what I've learned in my data coaching is that there's a lot of stigma behind some of the ACEs skills. So, and there's a lot of comfortability behind some of them. So I think that's showing up in the data as well, if it makes sense. And then if we scroll down, we also have something called a percentage of rating points and a percentage of rating points by ACEs skills. This is just letting us know how many students are getting scored on that 1 to 4, or if the courses weren't assessed. And then we're able to see these stacked bar charts of each individual ACES skills and where those scores are tracking on each of those skills. So basically, the 1 through 4 range of each skill. So we kind of see that social justice. If we hover over in the black, a lot of that was not assessed for some reason. But then if you go up, can you scroll? Yeah. So we see 4 is mastering. So 15% of the students doing that assessment are mastering it. And then 13% are earning and achieving. 15% are earning a 2, etc. So this is kind of how we see it. But Louisa, if you scroll up for me a little bit, the disaggregations here on the right side are really, I don't know anyone that on our campus that really uses this as is. Everyone is using these filter options, right? And so we have ACES characteristics, so you can dive into the specific skills. We have academic characteristics. And so there's a lot of different filtering options, particularly during our if you want to select, let's see. What is helpful is if how I've seen faculty engage with this is if you select a department, maybe, Lisa, and select, let's say, yeah, thank you, biology. They're able to see which ACEs they've been assessing and when. And if you want to also go down by course, they're able to see which courses are assessing. So they're able to not get at the section level, but more at the course level, and then also see the demographic characteristics of students and if they're part of DPS, Puente, Rise Up, CalWorks. We have student characteristics. In addition to demographic characteristics, we have the economically disadvantaged and first gen, if they're part of our dual enrollment program or not. So there's a lot of filtering options that faculty dive into to utilize and make sense of this data. And that's the next slide. I want to be conscious of time. Okay. So as I was saying, your data, it's not really impactful if it's just living on a website, right? So I think it's really critical to talk about impact and application of data, right? So we have this data, we make sense of it, and we have this dashboard. But what does that really mean? So how I see it from a research standpoint, especially in my role with data coaching, I see 3 different groups using this ACES institutional learning outcomes data. So 3 different groups, but using it in very different ways. So the first group is the faculty, and the second group is students, and then a third level is the college overall is using this data. So I think the most boring, straightforward one that I want to start with is the college. If I'm being honest, how we use this data is very yeah, so as you'd imagine, we're using it for program review, we're using it for strategic planning, accreditation, and to really get a hand on our learning outcomes as far as our program, course, and students, right? And so it's helping us kind of map out what we're actually developing with our students, right? Aside from the grades, aside from the awards, it's helping us understand what employability skills are being developed and where so that we could bridge any gaps for our students. For the faculty. So our institutional research department engages with faculty regularly, and so does the Outcomes and Assessment Committee. I don't want to discredit that, but for this, I'm going to focus on IR's role. And so with faculty, we do something called data coaching, and we do one-on-one data coaching with each department individually. They're invited to bring their entire faculty staff, adjuncts and tenures included, but it's primarily the coordinators. And this is for program review to identify their program learning outcomes, and even discuss course learning outcomes and student learning outcomes. And so really what this looks like is that we dive into each of our dashboards, including ACES, and we're looking at what ACES they're assessing and how and why. And it's really interesting because I'll give you an example. I was meeting with computer science faculty. And off the top, while I was loading up the ACES dashboard, they were saying, well, here are the ones that I assess, and I don't really have a reason to assess these, 2 or 3. But when we looked at their data, they were assessing it. And so they said, what? We assessed? Why did we assess resilience? So then we go into it, we're looking at the course, and then they remember whatever assignment, or they have a discussion with their faculty to try to figure out which ACEs are they assessing and why. So at the department level, it helps them really come up with a plan of here are the ACEs that align with our industry, and here are the key skills that we want our students to be able to communicate with employers once they leave our programs. And that's like big thinking, end of the tunnel goal, right? That's at the end of the road. But what I also help them realize is that some of our students are coming in and out of the college, right? And so at the end of the course, what are our students learning? In addition to the hard skills, what are the employability skills that they're learning? And do you want them to learn that? On the dashboard, we're also looking at demographic characteristics because I get into a lot of industry talk with our faculty, especially when it comes to outcomes. If they really want them to learn specific industry skills, but then they also talk about who is dominating those industries. So, for an example, I was meeting with cinema and broadcast, and they were saying that those industries are heavily dominated with Caucasian representation of employed. But when we looked at the assessments, we looked at who's in their program, they were serving a Caucasian population. So we talk about what are ways that you could implement ways to connect with your different demographic characteristics of students, with your disproportionate impact students, and how can your ACES assessments really get buy-in to reflect, your industry skills and how you want to diversify your industry. So that's the data coaching and the impact on the faculty level, just from IR and mostly a program service review or program review perspective. For students, I think the key takeaway is earning these badges, identifying what they're learning in real time, right? So not waiting for the grades. So unfortunately, some of our students don't finish the class. But if they did finish a couple of assignments, they're able to see that they developed data utilization or critical thinking or communication skills that if their academic journey is interrupted and they need to seek employment, they're able to communicate that, not just with their transcripts of the types of courses they took and the assignments, but they're able to translate the employability skills. I included a few quotes from our faculty and students from a prior video of this, but we're getting really good feedback from our students, and even this model of ACES has expanded to our student services area. But really, I think I just want to give you the overall idea of what's happening on the data level. And let's see, do I have any more slides, or is that? I think that's my last slide. I'm going to transition to Bradley so that he could really dive into the credential part of it, right? So Bradley is our technical guru of it. He really understands the credentialing piece and the rubric side. So Bradley, if you could expand on that.
Just to interrupt a second, Ariel, did you want to catch up on some of the questions that relate to the data before we get into credentialing?
Yeah, we can. Let's see.
Because we do have a few questions in the chat.
So did you say you assess every time the course is offered? Many institutions use a cycle, but turning it on and off of rubrics can get very messy. Yeah, we assess every time. My understanding is that we can assess anytime the course is offered. Lisa and Louisa, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd say once I have it in my Canvas rubric, I just keep assessing it every time I teach that course. It'd be more work to take it out of the rubric and put it back in again. So it just depends on when the course is offered mainly. And then you had another question about how do you handle inter-rater reliability? Do you require a rubric, norming, exercise, or some other method?
So I kind of answered that in the chat. We have a shared rubric. It's the ACES-ILO rubric, which provides a fairly articulated performance descriptors for each band that we, give emerging, developing, achieving, mastering. And the students have to get a 3 or a 4 twice in order to get that credential. So they're looking really more at like observable things rather than, and hopefully that supports the consistency among raters. I also saw a question about that being tied to evaluations, and I don't know how to answer that question, Louisa. I've never thought about it. It's from Amy. How do you address faculty concerns that the learning outcome assessment might be conflated with faculty evaluations performed by administration?
I think in terms of the ACES assessment is occurring in a Canvas rubric, which is going to be the students, part of the students' grades. Administration doesn't really, since like Ariel was saying, she anonymizes everything. So We don't get assessed on how our students are doing in those terms. That information will be hidden. We can just see the kind of at the course level on the data dashboards showing how, so there might be 5 sections of a course and we can see the overall ACES assessment happening for all of those sections at once. So it's not, you're not picking out individual instructors. I think based when we do evaluations and go into people's Canvas courses, we can see if ACES might be assessed or not, but we don't see what the results of those assessments are. But we do want faculty to assess ACES since that's part of the SLO process, and that is in the evaluations. So as long as they're doing some form of ACES assessment, then we're happy that they're engaged in that process. Did that hit the rest of the questions? See,
Sort of. I think folks are asking
Even
about
if
the
all the
rubrics
students are
because
performing or underperforming. It's about a
I'm sorry, I missed that. But the rubrics, I think Lisa answered it in the chat. That 1 through 4.
basic.
I think I'm getting feedback, so I'm going to mute myself. I know.
I
maybe Lisa's coming in and out.
anyway, Bradley.
So we try moving on to Bradley. We'll see if that fixes that.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Good?
Yes.
No feedback, nothing? All right. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Ariel, for for describing me as the tech guru. I appreciate that. I will say that I am the third tech guru in a lineage of tech gurus for this project. Consider myself a junior tech guru compared to them, one of whom happens to be in this audience. You know who you are, Matt. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how the digital credentialing works on the technical side, on the UI, UX, user interface, user experience side of things. There will be a little redundancy because I'll touch back a little bit on sort of what both Lisa, Louisa, and Ariel have talked about with sort of like the ACES integration itself, but I'll try to skip past some of those a little bit since those are so well outlined for us at the beginning of the presentation. So digital credentialing at Chaffey, as somebody who has spent a lot of time on various professional development courses and sites, especially in the tech industry, digital credentialing is very near and dear to my heart. The functionality of micro-credentialing, what it can do for a learner's journey, especially for that visible representation of the learner's continuing value, that they're gaining from this journey, i.e., those durable skills. So the main sort of goal behind any micro-credentialing project or digital credentialing project is that development of what is sometimes called in industry a T-shaped individual. And I have a little diagram there for that. Basically, it's a learner or a graduate, an employee who has a large breadth of durable skills. So coming, of course, from our ACES, our ACES assessments. So, adaptability, collaboration, as we've seen, communication and critical thinking being the standout skills. And the idea is that as somebody is going through their education, as someone is going through the workforce, that T at the top keeps expanding as you gain more and more of these skills. But then it narrows down to that bottom of the T with a depth of discipline-specific competencies. And I'll talk a little bit about that. That's sort of when we start to talk about our next efforts in more PLO CLO integration for discipline-specific credentialing. So, of course, the purpose is Chaffey's digital credentialing. It gives, as Lisa mentioned, it gives learning outcomes visibility for our students, and it also gives portability and easy verification. I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to more of the technical side of things, because there are some really neat, I'll try not to nerd out too much, some neat technical aspects for how we do that, how that works. The alignment, of course, coming from the ACES alignment, those rubrics that my co-presenters have talked about that live in the LMS. And that then with that interplay between the rubrics and our mechanisms and functionality within Canvas, that translation of those skills to visible badges or tokens. And of course, why it matters, we've touched on that, student equity, employability, and that skills transparency mission that we have with these types of initiatives. So in the next slides, I'll get a little more technical. I'll try not to get too esoteric with any terms. I have purposefully banned myself from too many acronyms. But if you have questions or I lose anybody, I'll of course leave time at the end for questions for all of us. So next slide, please, Louisa. So this goes back to sort of how digital credentialing is implemented in Canvas. Ariel talked a lot about sort of where that data lives, living in the LMS. The rubrics are the heart of this system, of course. This is controlled through a large data source that is currently manually maintained, but as Ariel mentioned, we're working on larger sort of data availability projects with having these things connect into intrinsic informer and our SIS and so on. But sort of the three linchpins or key components of this program is the Canvas LMS. Then the Canvas outcome alignment tool, which I'll touch a little bit more on, that is a custom built tool in partnership with Chaffey and Instructure. And then the Canvas credentials itself, where those are housed, now Canvas credentials provided by Parchment and Infrastructure, but formally, if you've been in this space in the past, you may have known it as Badger, which issues and stores the actual digital credentials and stores that unique digital property, which the students can then take. That's where the portability part of this comes in. Key requirements being, of course, that the outcomes must exist. So the rubrics have to exist in Canvas. They exist in our particular instance now at the root level or the global level of Canvas. And then we have mapping set up on the back end. So that way they then various rubrics get mapped to the appropriate directories based on department, on discipline and program and so on. The digital badge, of course, then has to be created on the Parchment side or Canvas credentialing side of the house. And then that outcomes alignment tool is what connects these across, interprets that rubric into then an awardable, achievable token or badge. The result, of course, being, as is the goal with any kind of complex technical system, is to continually decrease the need for manual action on these systems and to increase the amount of automation available. I'm pleased to say that we're getting really, really good, really slick with our automation here. And I'll talk a little bit more of that sort of on the student experience side. So next slide, please, Louisa. So this is just a little, again, touching back on ACES. You have a little, you have an image of our current ACES or some of our current ACES tokens and credentials, what they look like. On the student side, as the student earns these in their portal for Chaffey badging, they will see things like this. These badges can then also, of course, be shared. The goal being sort of outcome to credentialing workflow. I won't spend too much time on this because Ariel really broke this down for us from the data coaching side of things to then the rubric creation and sort of how assessing works. With the outcome and alignment tool, we're able to map one credential to one or more outcomes or to one or more tokens, basically, to earn that mastery level up to a credential. Let's see, talked about assessment logic. Okay, I'll skip assessment logic because again, we touched on it a little bit, but faculty impact is of course a really, really big one. That's a really big one that comes up a lot, I know, for everybody here on our panel as we're working with our various stakeholders. And this is where that automation comes into play. The nice thing about how we have this set up, and credit again to previous teams who really sort of pioneered this and campaigned for this, is that once faculty have gone through that process of data coaching with Ariel and her team and with Louisa and Lisa, and we have those rubrics now published and they're in that data source and they're loaded into Canvas. Once that's done and they're applied into that Canvas shell, really nothing else has to happen in terms of making this part of the earning and translation work. Once that's done, then faculty go about their regular instructional processes, and students go about their regular interaction with the course. As they complete their assignments, that translation tool automatically starts that translation into those tokens and credentials. All right, next slide, please. So the student experience, this is a couple of screenshots from the student side of the house. This is what a student would see as they log into Canvas and their outcomes and alignment tool for their particular badging and awarding. This is all done, I'll mention sort of data privacy and sort of data security. This is all done through our My Chaffey portal, through SSO. But you can see here, a student can see right away any organizational badges they have earned, and then they can do more of a deep or granular dive into their pathways. That's the bottom photo there. And they can start to plot the competencies they have achieved. They can start to plot the various tokens they've earned, and they can see in real time, as Ariel mentioned, in real time, their progress towards these awards, towards these credentials. So again, earning credentials assessed through regular coursework. Once applied, viewing done by student based off of their IDs in our SIS. And then notifications going out to students also automated every 24 hours as the students earn and are awarded these tokens and certificates. All right, next slide, please. All right, so how students use digital credentials. So all of the nerdy stuff on my side aside from data and connectors and blah blah blah, how are students actually engaging with this? So outside of just viewing their progress in Canvas, one of the big things that we are really encouraged to see is that students are starting to share these awards on platforms outside of Chaffey, outside of the academia environment. For example, and I apologize, I took the least impressive photo of the dashboard because I only captured like 2 months worth of shares. We're actually, since this project's this sort of onboarding of this, we're actually well over 3,500 shares from our learners and our earners, especially, which we're really happy to see on LinkedIn, both the LinkedIn feed and in the LinkedIn profile, with the LinkedIn profile being sort of the most crucial because it's not just a feed post, but it's actually living in that person's public page where an employer might go and see it. And this is where I'll now talk a little bit more techy about the portability of these. The way our system works with this custom tool and with in tandem with Instructure's vendor delivered Canvas credentials and parchment system is that each badge has a unique digital identifier, meaning that once the student has this award and the student shares that, that sharing, that posting has a unique digital identifier which shows that this student owns it. And that identifier goes with that badge forever after that. The mechanism for this, to get a little techie, is through the public api.badger.io. And again, the beauty is that a potential employer who is looking at this has the confidence to know that if it's on that student's feed or that student's page, it does belong to that student. So last slide here. I want to make sure I am conscious of time so we leave time for any questions. So this is just sort of a little bit looking to the future of digital credentialing at Chaffey. That title sounds a little presumptuous, like I'm talking about the future of digital credentialing en masse, but at Chaffey, is again that development more into targeted, purpose-built digital credentials by discipline. So really pulling in the PLO, CLO side of our assessments. I have a little map for you. This was created by one of the original visionaries for this process. Sort of how, when we're doing these data coachings and we're giving these types of things to departments to look at, that graph, you have to squint, shows basically how an awarding for a final certificate, the gray box, would happen. So the red boxes would be tokens that students are earning mastery in them after 2 times, moving on to milestones in some cases, then on to that final digital credential. I have some concept renderings at the bottom for badges that are already in the field for our PLOs and CLOs. Um, we currently have, especially for CIS parts of our school of our academics, we have robust industry specific credentialing now for that. Data management, data security, ethical hacking, and so on. We're branching into the welding side of things. One of my favorite badges on that side is shielded arc welder. That sounds really impressive. I would love to have that badge myself. And then moving into fashion design, and merchandising. So yeah, a bit of a whirlwind, but that brings us sort of to where we are and the future of where we hope to go with our digital credentialing. I will open it back up for question. Or sorry, pardon me. Louisa has 2 other slides. I won't step on her tiny toes.
Okay, so I just have the kind of closing of what's coming next. Kind of like what Bradley was saying about the discipline-specific credentials. So we're currently in the process of working with individual programs, meeting with them one-on-one, revising and mapping discipline-specific course learning outcomes, or CLOs, to their program learning outcomes, or PLOs. We keep using CLOs and PLOs. But once we have the department work on what course learning outcomes, what program learning outcomes that matches to, then we make a rubric that is specific to their courses, or specific to their course learning outcomes. So we need the discipline experts to kind of make sure the language matches what they're teaching. And then once we have that rubric, we can upload that into Canvas, and that's going to become part of the Canvas rubric system. Just like we put an ACES skill for institutional learning outcomes into our Canvas rubric, say when I'm assessing critical thinking, I can now also, when I have my course-specific learning outcomes that are specific to my biology discipline, I can put that into my assignment as well, into my Canvas rubric. So not only will faculty be assessing institutional learning outcomes, our ACEs, but then we're also going to be able to assess our program and our discipline-specific course learning outcomes. We still, when we are doing these, we're already doing the assignment. Now I just have a criteria on my rubric that goes to it. And that when I hit submit, it goes to the behind the scenes where institutional research, like Ariel, can grab that data, analyze it, and then in the future have data dashboards that are specific to my courses. So we're reframing our coursework, taking the curriculum that we're teaching, and we're tying it to specific skills, discipline-specific skills, where the experts, the discipline experts, are the ones who are assigning those skills. And then when they earn a badge, they're getting it from a discipline expert to earn a badge. So we'll have kind of a more broad ACES skills, employability skills, but what's coming, and we're kind of in the process of starting to assess this, we need to gather enough data in order to build those dashboards to look at discipline-specific skills as well. So that students can then take both of them into their careers or whatever coursework they're going to be doing in the future. So that's kind of what we're collecting now, and we'll have data dashboards for that in the future. And so that was just my concluding part, and we can come back and catch up on any questions. We have questions in the chat that we need to catch up on. Let's see.
Yeah, so I see where and how do we share the data. It's mostly on our public dashboards, and then it's also embedded in our program review. So they're asked to inform us which ACEs their courses and departments are assessing, and the percent of sections offered that are assessing ACEs. So we have internal goals of 50% that we hope to put in our strategic plans to be able to really move the needle on the integration of ACEs. That's a new addition that the dashboard will have, is that the percent of sections offering or assessing ACEs by term will be included in that this summer. So that's sort of how those reports and that data is utilized and processed.
Did we get to the other questions in the chat, or were there? I think Lisa was keeping track of that one.
Lisa was killing it most part. I do see a question, just wondering about like faculty complaining about it. It sounds like they aren't. And I think we get a mixed review, right? Like I think for some faculty initially, I wouldn't say complain, but maybe hesitant because like, what is the rubric? Where does it live? Is this extra work for me? Is this infringing upon academic freedom? Like, what does this do? But once we're able to demystify it, remove some of those stereotypes and barriers, Lisa and Louisa have done a really good job at creating this like community of practice to inform faculty and empower them on how and where the rubrics live and how to integrate that into their courses. So for those who have adopted it, say it's easy, they just kind of copy their shell and they're able to do it, and that it's less work for them to track assessments. That's been my interpretation. Do any of my colleagues want to share or expand on that?
I would agree with that, I think the biggest hurdle has been what they're doing now is good enough. They put a lot of work into figuring out those assessments. And then realizing, okay, we do a little bit of mapping, add this to your Canvas rubric. Once they realize, once they get through that step and realize, oh, if they've already been doing ACEs, now adding this discipline-specific coursework to their rubrics. I think once they get used to what's happening in Canvas, then they realize, oh, it's easier once we have it in Canvas. Because then the faculty job is done when you hit the submit button until it comes to program review when we analyze the data. Well, we get so much help analyzing the data.
There's another question about the percentage of faculty using the ACEs rubrics as expected. Now, I'm interpreting that as expected as in correctly, right? That's 1 to 4 if they're implementing it. And that fluctuates by term. So we track it by term, by year. And since we've been doing it for 5 years, it fluctuates. But I'll tell you the most recent poll. Probably of those who are assessing ACEs, I think we're at around like a 92%-ish of those who are implementing it correctly. So what I also do to help Louisa and Lisa data coach, because they're also champions of this work, is that I extract the courses that aren't assessing ACEs that are, and then I even have a separate file for those who are assessing it not as expected, right? So we have a separate file for courses who are not engaging it as, not utilizing the rubrics as expected, which is a really small percentage of those who are. It's very odd, and we're trying to figure out how they were able to do it not as expected. But then it's very intentional marketing and outreach to support the adoption of rubrics correctly.
Let's see. So I think, I don't know, maybe Bradley can answer have we seen evidence of digital credentials helping students get the actual jobs? I know we can see it on LinkedIn, but have we seen the success rate for getting the jobs?
So right now, I'll preface this by saying I'm still the new kid on the block for this part. So that is something that I want to eventually look into. I mean, I can speak anecdotally to, various things you'll see, like, people who talk online and in very various professional circles about the efficacy of digital credentialing. I have not started figuring out how to collect this data outside of Chaffey just yet, but that's coming.
And then let's see, the last question is, are some faculty just not scoring the rubrics at all, and how many? I don't know that we look to see who's not doing it. For program review, we ask that 50% of sections are doing ACEs assessment. So institutional research helps kind of gather that data for us. And that way is kind of that's the bar we're trying to set. And I think we often do make that bar, but if someone's not doing it, that doesn't necessarily come through as long as we're getting 50% of the overall sections. Because we're not trying to penalize people, we just want people to engage in the learning outcome assessment process. Any other questions? So I think we're getting close to our time. Maybe not.
I
Well, we
want to
appreciate
add.
you joining us. And oh, Ariel, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add, in addition to Louisa mentioning our program learning outcomes and course learning outcomes that are coming and going to be on the dashboard, we also plan to do follow-ups with our students. So this work was initially heavily researched, and we surveyed large groups of our current students, our alumni, employers, etc. So we plan to do follow-ups with that, including focus groups and tracking the outcomes of it, right? So how are they interacting with the credentials? How is it leveraging employment for them, etc. So we plan to do a lot of follow-up studies, but thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at more sessions.